Well, hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Mission Thriving Life podcast, a weekly podcast designed to help you thrive, not just survive the challenges of life, leadership, and faith. My name is Nick Asolis. I'm here with Joel Thomas, and today we're going to be continuing our discussion about the book and the message series that we're going through, and really just sort of the way of understanding how you communicate in interpersonal relationships, known as "I said this, you heard that." What was the you had mentioned this week, Joel, that you got it confused with?
I don't know if it's subconscious but I had to confess that, it's funny, I did an interview this week with the author of the book, and I confessed to her that I, for some reason, I always forget that the title is "I said this, you heard that," and I always think it's "he said this, she heard that," because that's how it works in my world. So
Did that get you in any trouble, or is that just sort of like that's just
maybe a
part of the
little bit.
gig?
Well, that'll probably come out a little more in this
That that
somewhere.
opening video, by the way, like I love things that are funny to people because everybody can relate to it. So the video with the girl that has the nail in her forehead.
Oh yeah, from last week.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you haven't seen the title or the opening video from last week, I encourage you to go on and watch last week's
Yeah.
message, because it's a really funny video, and it's
From
it's
week one.
funny.
Yep.
Yeah, from week one. It's funny to everyone because, especially guys, like
Yep.
guys are laughing because like we've been in that situation before, and girls are laughing because like, yeah, we do that, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's funny, but
Like,
if you laugh too
you're
much,
always trying to fix it. You're trying to,
yeah.
and it's like, well, okay, what
Oh
do I
man.
say?
So, but if you laugh too much and your spouse is right next to you, then you do get in trouble. It's like
Then you're in trouble.
you're taking this way too serious.
Yeah.
Well, this week we kind of wanted to kind of go a little bit next level with what we talked about from Sunday in part 2 of the series, and just this idea that in terms of um, our words, and this idea of dispensing grace, which I know we're going to kind of get more into that a little bit later, but this Ephesians 4:29 verse that keeps coming up, uh, you kind of use this illustration of these 3 concentric circles that we're all really at the middle of, and those circles are our inner circle, which is like our family, those really
Yeah.
close relationships, our
Yeah.
intentional, which is like the people that we work with, we go to church with, kind of the softball team, whoever else. And then influence, which is like people that are just within our reach, that maybe follow us on social media, or
You're more acquaintances.
acquaintances, or even people that we pass by at the grocery store, or while we're pumping gas,
Yep.
that we may not that could be complete strangers, but for whatever reason they've entered our circle of influence. And so I thought it'd be great for us today just to you painted this picture sort of towards the end of the message on Sunday, and kind of outlined it, and I thought it'd be great for us just to go a little bit deeper into that and kind of talk application, like answer the so what
Yep.
question of what does it look like to apply everything we've learned up to this point, and the colors and all that stuff, to how we engage in those circles. So with that, where do you
Yeah.
want to start?
Well, so just as a premise for each of those concentric circles, the thing that we talked about is, week one, we really focused on the fact that our temperaments determine the words that we speak. And then this last week, the focus was more about our temperaments also determine the words we need to hear. And the focus of this series is not about you getting your needs met and people speaking words to you. This is about you. This verse, because it's the Ephesians 4:29 verse, is all about the words that come out of our mouths not being unwholesome, which we've defined as unhelpful and unhealthful, which this week's going to be a real spirited conversation in our part 3, just as a preview, because we're going to focus completely on the unhealthful words. We've been really focused on unhelpful words. And many times we don't realize our words are unhelpful because they're the ones that naturally would be helpful to us.
Right.
And so the thing we said is, if our temperament determines the words we need to hear, then when you decide you're going to speak according to the temperament or the needs of other people, that changes every conversation. It needs to change every conversation. Unless you're speaking to somebody who has the same wiring as you, which there's a 1 in 4 chance of that happening in our church. Like we split almost perfectly in the 4 different temperaments. But unless you're speaking to somebody who has the same needs as you and has the same color temperament as you, you have to change the nature of your language and your conversation and the words you use to speak according to their needs, to speak helpful words that actually do build them up. Because they may be words that build you up, but just because they build you up doesn't mean they build other people up. And I used an example of my daughter. Like, you know, for me, if we're gonna have we're surprising our kids with a adventure, like if it had been me growing up, if my dad ran in the room, was like, all right, get up, we're all gonna go to Sedona today, and we're going to Slide Rock, and we're gonna go have fun, and it would have been like, I'd have been jumping out of bed, energized by that, ready to go. And my daughter Gentry is not like that at all. Like it's like if I go in her room and I go, hey, we're going to Slide Rock today, she like pulls the covers over her head and starts crying. Like it's like,
Yeah.
like you know, that feels like she's like, oh, because she feels distressed. I got to get up. I got to get ready. I got to brush my teeth. I got to, you know, get cleaned up. I got to get dressed. What am I going to wear? You know, she just feels all of that. And so, you know, walking into her room, I have to use different words. I have to approach her differently. And it's not the ones I would naturally use that would make me excited about the day. But if I want her to be excited about the day and I want her to look forward to what we're doing together, I have to start with sort of a different approach. And I talked a little bit about that this weekend, but that's the idea is when we speak according to the temperaments of other people, it changes every conversation. So the question as we were moving towards the concentric circles was, you know, how are you using your words to build up your spouse or your kids or your coworkers? And we sort of went through these different circles. How are you using your words to build them up according to their needs? How is it actually changing your conversations? How is the knowledge of what their needs are, which again, we went through in the message. If you didn't listen to the message, I talked about specifically things that build up each temperament and things that tear down each temperament. So what were their needs? What did they need to hear in order to be built up versus the things that tear them down? And so when we got to the concentric circles, the idea the circle, they have less impact. And if you want them to say more of them over a longer period of time. And so, so that was one of the points that we were making related to which circle. And obviously, like I used the illustration of earthquake because it kind of has those circle rings that show the impact going out. You know, at the center circle where the biggest impact is felt by your words, where it only takes a few words to shift the temperature of the conversation or the relationship significantly, that inner circle is the people that you live with, that you're around the most. It's your spouse, it's your kids. If you're, a teenager or college student, maybe it's your parents that you live with. And all of those people, this was the last part of the verse that we focused on. All of those people need grace. They need you to speak according to their needs, which is how you administer grace to them. Right. And so, thinking through, your relationship with your spouse. And I know for you and I both, neither one of our spouses have the same primary color we do.
Right.
And that's true of most people in marriage. And, I know my wife at the end of the sermon, I told you this before we got on, end of the sermon on Sunday, my wife and I were having a conversation. Actually, it was after I got home from church. She said, so just curious, was there anything you feel like you need to do differently as a result of the sermon today? And I'm like, that is not fair. You can't use my sermons against me.
It's a trap.
It is a trap. So, but I'm sure there were a lot of people having those conversations. It's sort of like, I'm curious, like, and it's natural for us to lean into other people and go, hey, were you listening? Like, are you going to do anything different? Did you see what would build me up? Because this, and this is true of you. When the blue words that build you up and the words that tear you down, when you read those on the screen, there was something in you that was like, that's true. And if Mandy was sitting next to you at that moment, you'd have been like nudging her like, hey, are you paying attention? Like, that's what you need to know, because that's the way we all but the thing I really want trying to get people in our church to think of is like, look, that's not up to you.
Right.
Like, and yes, they need to take responsibility for that, but let's talk about you. How are you, Nick, living with Mandy or with your boys according to theirs and communicating according to their needs? I know you guys had a family conversation about this.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So we finally got, and I got two teenage boys. We finally got them both to take it. And it's kind of fun, watching watching my youngest son take it. And I think, he didn't say this, but I kind of felt like, when you're a teenager, you kind of have these feelings in the back of your mind, like, am I just a weirdo? Like, am I the only one who's wired this way, or are there other people like me? And so there is a little bit of you could tell him taking the test, like, sort of being validated, like, oh, okay, like, this is like, there are
Yeah,
people like me who do operate and do emote this way. I'm not some weirdo, and this test kind of validates that. And
sure.
so it helped him, for one, I think, kind of have a little bit of a framework of understanding himself. But yeah, we had a fun family conversation on the back porch, just going, all right, so we know I'm the only blue in my family. So there was a lot of like, okay, so what does dad need? Like,
Yep.
what's like, what
Yep.
this whole silence and solitude, like, what does that look like for us? And um, it was,
Space and silence. Space and
that's right.
silence.
That's right. Space and silence. Like, it was helpful, I think, for us to, especially the chart that you had on Sunday. We screenshotted that of each of the colors and what are their needs, and we just had a family discussion around, just being aware of what each person in our family, there's four of us, but what their needs are in terms of communication. For me, even as a
Yeah.
parent, um, having a son who's a pretty bright red. Um, and just understanding, like, how to motivate him and how to discipline him or whatever, allowing him to do things on his timeline and his way within bounds, obviously, but it
Sure.
comes to school, like, not micromanaging him or belittling his intelligence, really kind of speaking to that is all really useful stuff. It's useful for parenting, it's useful for marriage, and then to also see just the two kids sort of understand each other based on their colors too. It was a fun conversation. I think everybody kind of took something away from it in terms of, gosh, we can really bring a next level of peace or grace
Yeah.
into our household just by understanding the best language to communicate with each individual in.
Which I think is interesting because you said pretty much everybody else in your house is dominant red, right? Their primary color is
Yeah,
red.
yeah. My wife and my youngest son are both red yellow, and then my other son is he's green. But he took
Okay.
the test and he has some red, which is it. I know they're
Okay.
kind of opposites, but he
Yeah,
definitely has some red tendencies. So
that's right. So it is interesting because, like, it probably makes it easier for Mandy and Eli, who's your youngest, to communicate, and
yeah,
they're probably on the same wavelength a lot more, and their needs are similar. And so when Mandy naturally speaks to situations in Eli's life, she speaks his native language, his native color,
sure.
which is probably a little bit more work for you with Eli, and even
Yeah,
with Jake, to some degree. So, the learning curve for you is a little bit steeper
it
with
is.
Eli
Yeah,
specifically.
and it's interesting too. My wife and I have been married for 20 years, and I've learned without, before having these colors, I've just sort of learned from being married to her the the triggers, the ways to talk to
Yeah,
her. And I have found, especially as Eli's become older and is becoming a teenager, a lot of that same language and a lot of that same approach that I use with Mandy is
it works with Eli.
it works with Eli. And now it's like,
I'm
okay,
sure. Yeah,
that's why
yeah.
that's why that
That's
works
why.
that way.
That's right.
We actually
That's
have
right.
we've used the 429 verse in our house for a while. For me, having boys, they're constantly saying stuff that just, like, you just put your hand in your face. Like, why would you say it?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so we always go, dude, 429. Don't let that stuff come into your mouth. I remember when I first introduced 429 to them, the boys were younger. I called out one of them, was like, hey man, don't say that, 429. And the other one goes, and I'm not going to say who is who, you know, to protect the innocent. He goes, yeah, 429, idiot. I'm like, okay, you obviously don't get the idea of 429
Let's
either.
review this one more time.
Yeah, we should probably revisit the verse instead of the number.
It's interesting because I have a similar situation with my oldest, who is wired like Jen. He's a blue, and you know, it being a yellow for me, and him being the oldest, and you know, I help coach his soccer team. It's just, as I've been trying to figure out how to build him up and motivate him and encourage him in sports, like, it's just, we speak different languages, and so I find myself trying to, like, you know, you know, give him approval and, like, you know, inspire him and things, you know, do what would have built me up as a yellow. And it's like, he needs a safe environment to fail. Right. And he needs my support in his insecurities and the things that he's trying to process and struggle as he's moved up and playing at another level. And, you know, and sometimes he just needs space. Like, he doesn't need me to, you know, like, when he'll have a tough practice, he doesn't need me on the way home to go, hey, how'd you think practice went tonight? You know, like, he just needs time to process it himself and not really talk about it. And so it's just, you know, I'm with you in the same thing, you know, when it comes to, I'm still learning, you know, in my own household with how to communicate. And, you know, my younger two, we're still, you know, we're still trying to figure out exactly, you know, they can't really take the assessment for themselves. One of them, and I won't say which one, we know is red. He is highly red. and you know, and I can relate. And the other one's yellow. And so the yellow one's really easy for me too. So, you know, those are colors for me. They're more natural, but, like, I have to work, and Jen and I both have to work with green, because neither one of us have green in us. So, like, when it comes to gentry, you know, it's like learning a different language and communicating in different ways. So,
well,
so the next circle, sorry.
I think that would be it, just kind of put a fine point on the inner circle. That'd probably be my biggest so what, like, application takeaway for people is, if you haven't done the test in your, you know, in your marriage, in your home with your kids, you know, obviously, like you said, there's a certain age where it's like you just kind of have to take it for them, or you have to guess based on what you know up to this point. But, like, I would encourage everyone to do that, and then to just have a family conversation. Maybe it's a family dinner, you know, not a serious thing. Like, you know, we're going to sit down and, you know, have a Bible study about this, but just have a family conversation, explain the colors, and put it out in the open so that everybody's aware, you know, like, we all, like, there isn't one person who's weird or wrong or different. It's just the way that we're wired, and it's helpful for peace and grace to rule in our homes, for us to understand each other. So I think, you know, that'd probably be my biggest recommendation for application for the inner circle.
Yeah, I think it's a good one. And I think it's something everybody can benefit from. So, so let's move to the next circle, you know, because I think it can get tricky, you know, when you, so what's the intentional circle? And for some people, these are close friendships. They're coworkers. So I'll start on the relational side. Like, you know, I know for us in our small group, like, as we're growing and deepening our relationships and trying to create an environment in our small group where people can lean on each other more, where people come and the experience is uplifting. Like, when we went through this study together as a small group, which we did it earlier this year, as a group before we got into the series. I know a lot of our groups are going through it now, or about to start going through it, but you know, it really had a major impact on our language as a group to each other, as we began to learn, oh, that's why so-and-so is like that. And who are the blues? These are the blues in the group, and these are the greens in the group, and here's the yellows, and here's the reds. And so as we began to understand and deepen in our relationships, I've even seen the way it changes language. And it's funny, since then, as we've been together, as we've been having discussions, there will be other people in our group that will go, that's the yellow in you. Like, that's great. They would call it out, and they'll build people up and, like, hey, you should bring that out more, you know, in their life. You need to leverage that more. So it's really helpful, like, in those circles, for, you know, and you know this, you've been in group life a lot. It's really easy when people are focused on themselves and their own needs,
Right.
how much that can be draining. I think most of the time, like small groups, when they fail and they don't work, it's a failure on the part, and I don't want to put this all on our leaders, but it's a failure of the leader and the people in the group to decide, I'm showing up for other people. I know I'm going to get something out of this as well, but
Right.
I'm going to show up because there's people that are going to be at this group that need me to show up. And the great thing about that is, if we're all showing up for each other as opposed to showing up for ourselves, if I'm showing up for myself, like in our group, I'm one person that's trying to get from 11 other people in my group, as opposed to there's 11 people showing up for one person.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all showing up for other individuals,
Right.
and we're doing it for the purpose of building each other up. And once we began to learn the colors of our of the other people in our group, it really helped us to, like, as we were having conversations on other topics, to really encourage and speak words that really were life-giving to different temperaments.
I think, yeah.
So,
And I think, you even made the joke about, this is your boss and it's the red guy from,
yeah, Inside Out.
Inside Out. And everybody had
Which
a
is a
good chuckle.
brilliant movie, by the way, that doesn't get enough credit, but it's anyway.
For sure. But like, I was thinking about, just the application of this for that intentional circle, with friends and small group, these types of conversations can, you have a little bit of more of a mandate, and, like you did in your small group, like you took this test. And so everybody kind of knew and you're able to talk about it. For most of us, and obviously it's probably more true for me because I work at a church, and so we are having these conversations. But like, for the average person, you're really not going to have these kind of, hey, what color are you? Are you sanguine or whatever in the workplace? And so the application's a little bit trickier. You talked about, like, what words, what like keywords, phrases are going to dominate these relationships, and that and your your coworkers who you work with, or your boss, who maybe not be studying this stuff and might not even care what temperament language you speak.
Right.
So it's a little bit more difficult because it's a one-way street for you. And you really are putting to the test, what you said at the top of the podcast, which is, it's not about, the way that I receive it, but it's the way that I give it or communicate to other people. Because it's going to be hard, especially if you have some coworkers that you just don't get along with, that you don't like, but really, defaulting to Ephesians 4:29, and also defaulting to, what are the words that I want to dominate this relationship.
You bring up a really good point. And one of the things I really challenge people, what we're going to allow govern these relationships. And that's Ephesians 4:29, by the way. The not letting any words, it's about governing your words. It's about governing what comes out of your mouth. And I think my internet's messing up. Is that me? Sorry.
Yeah.
It's not really podcast content, but
it did a little bit.
I think
I'm coming through now.
Okay. So it's about choosing what words are going to go. Is even if your boss isn't interested, even if your company's not, even if you're not in a position to go, hey, we should all take this temperaments assessment and let's understand our wiring so we can communicate better. Like, there are people that do that. There are teams that do that. And maybe you're fortunate enough to be on one of those teams, but even if you aren't, and you're in you have a toxic relationship with somebody on your team, it's probably two ways. And you're allowing toxic words or unhelpful words or unwholesome words to govern your relationship just as they are. And the thing I would say is, so if the sum total of that problem, or the 100% of the problem is shared between the two of you, you figuring out, well, what percentage of that is yours? So let's say only 30% of of the problem is really you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you decide that you're not going to allow unhelpful or unhealthful or unwholesome words to come out of your mouth, that relationship's going to at least get 30% better.
Right.
Like you actually have some control, and that's not accounting for any impact that might have on that person when you begin to speak according to their wiring. In fact, I would say one of the things that might be an action item. Some of you, but talk about the needs, what builds people up, all those slides from our message series. For some, it's like, it might be going, hey, what's my difficult intentional relationship? Like, this is somebody I want to have a long-term relationship with, whether it's a friend or it's a neighbor, somebody you guys do life with, somebody that maybe your spouse is close friends with somebody, and it's that person's husband or that person's wife, and it's like, hey, this is a difficult relationship for me, but it might be the right step for you to go, I'm going to try and figure out what their wiring is, and what color they are. And, maybe it's awkward. It would be inappropriate for you to have them take an assessment, but
Yeah.
you probably, by looking at the behaviors, the information that we've even given, the overview of the words, just by listening to the words that they speak, like Reds, they speak words of power and control. Well, it's kind of easy to recognize those types of people. And, so once you figure out what color they are, then choosing in those conversations that you're going to, out of discipline, decide, I'm not going to let unwholesome words come out of my mouth. I'm going to choose to speak according to their need. That could be an amazing first step to transforming a relationship. And here's why I'm going to jump to the end. I know we were going to wait for this to end. I keep wanting to pull this trigger, but the last part of the verse is that it may benefit all who listen. It may benefit the people who listen. And that word benefit, it gets minimized in the English translation. It's really two Greek words, and we unpacked this on the weekend. But the two Greek words come from the two Greek words that make up that word benefit comes from the word didomi, which means to administer or to give. And it's like when you administer medicine or something that would heal somebody. And charis is the other word, the word grace. And so it literally means to administer grace to people. And you think about our family relationships, you think about our work relationships. We all need grace. You just never know what's going on in people's lives. And when you choose to participate with God by administering grace, by offering grace to people through words, according to their need, because of your knowledge of them, that might be the difference for some people between a difficult work environment and relationship that's toxic and they don't look forward to working with somebody, or in this climate, and a complete transformation in that arena because they administered grace. Grace is a powerful thing, and it transformed the environment. It transformed the relationship. It transformed how they operated and worked together. And
it's one of those things, like, what really can you go, like, how really can you go wrong by administering grace? Like, what, at the end of the day, you administer grace, it's not reciprocated, and you get, run over, or whatever the situation may be. You get taken advantage of and treated poorly. But at least you did what God called you to do. And
you walk away with peace.
That's right.
You walk away knowing I didn't contribute to that.
That's right.
Like, it's not on my conscience. The scripture doesn't say make sure you live at peace with everyone, because that's impossible. It's an impossible command. It says, what does it say? It says, if it's at all possible if it's within your control, doing everything that you can do, live at peace with everyone.
That's right.
And I think that's the idea. It's like, okay, I'm going to do whatever I can do that's within my control, so that I can walk away going, I'm doing everything I can do. And I think that has an impact. People notice that. And especially when you make the shift. And I was probably a little bit pushy this weekend about this. And it just feels like if there's anybody who's going to turn the dial on that, and if there's a group of people that our words should sound different. You know, the point I made it this weekend was that the language of grace sounds different than the language of culture. And the thing that I get concerned with is that the language of Christians doesn't sound all that different than the language of culture.
Mm.
In fact, oftentimes I think the language of Christians sounds so much more like the language of culture than it does the language of grace that God speaks to each one of us. But when we choose to participate in this language of grace and administer grace through our words and use that language, it has the same transformative power that God's words to us have in our life. And it's in fact empowered by his grace through us.
And I think that, you know, we brought it up talking about the intentional circle, you know, friends, coworkers, things like that. But I think that concept transcends all three circles, and especially maybe even gets even more difficult when we're talking about the third circle, which is influence. In that, you know, it can be easy to, and you know, sometimes it's not, but it can be easy to administer grace to those that we love. And, you know,
you certainly have more motivation.
That's right. Because we're invested in those people, you know, for whatever reason, like we want to let,
and it's going to have an immediate impact in your life.
Yeah, know,
exactly. So if you don't, you deal with the consequences.
But that guy that, you know, cuts you off in traffic, or you know, that person with that political bumper sticker on their car that you don't like, or the, you know, the annoying, you know, person arguing over coupons in line at the grocery store that's slowing up your day, that person on social media who you used to be friends with and now they're just super annoying on social media. Like,
I unfollowed somebody this week.
It's so hard to, you know, to ask yourself, okay, how am I ministering grace? Like, by me diving into this conversation online, or by me posting this thing, or by me, you know, just laying on the horn. Like, I don't know. There's so, like, that's a whole separate, well, we did a sermon series on this, but like, there's so much.
Well, there is, but to get it to the really practical side, when it comes to you, like, and I said jokingly and not jokingly, because it actually happened. I unfollowed somebody this week. And the reason I unfollowed them is because I realized every time I see their posts, I don't have anything good to respond with. Like, I have this temptation to speak unwholesome words. Like, and the things that immediately come to mind every time I see the posts are just, they're not helpful and they're not building up. And there's part of me, and I'm not really that close with this person. I don't interact with them on a regular basis, but they're in my sort of social circle. Like, we're friends on social media, and it's like, I just need to disconnect from that relationship.
Yeah.
And so that I'm not tempted to use unwholesome words to tear down. And I find myself, you know, just to be real, like, the temptation is too great sometimes. And they make it too easy to want to just, you know, hey, you've thought about this, and so, but I think the important thing about that is I need to ask myself, who am I that to other people? Like, am I that to some other people? Like, are there other people that see me in that way, and that my language and the things that I say doesn't represent something they're attracted to? Because that's the other thing. You know, maybe not as a religious concept, but everybody's attracted to grace. Grace is an irresistible idea. Everyone loves a free gift. I mean, isn't it true? Like, when somebody, and everybody makes mistakes, and we're all attracted to people that cut us slack, or say, hey, listen, I've been there. I get it. I totally understand. Like, people that don't beat us up for our faults and failures and mistakes, because we all know we have them. I mean, those are people we're attracted to. Those are, and so I think that was sort of my point if we're going to have influence in our culture, if we're going to change the way in which people are relating on social media, like, I can't control that in all of social media, but I can control that within my page and within my circle. Like, I can communicate differently. And you know this, you follow people, you're friends with people that it's almost, I was going to say it's almost annoying, but for me, it's like, oh my gosh, like it's inspiring and challenging. Like they always are posting such positive things. And even when there's negative things, they find a way to take something that's negative and put a gracious spin on it,
Yeah.
you know. And it's and those are people I love to follow, because I love to hear, you know, their ideas. They have more influence with me because
Hmm.
of the way in which they treat people and the gracious ways in which they respond to criticism, even on their own ideas. And
That's good.
I think in when it comes to the influence circle, I think people are watching, and it makes a difference. And when we choose to administer grace in those broader, because it's you know, if I don't have to see you tomorrow and have a conversation with you, it's so much easier for me to fire a zinger off onto you on social media, as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to somebody that I walk into the office and have to you know, have a relationship with, or a working relationship. I'm not doing that on social media. But the broader circle, that influence broader circle, it's easy. The temptation is really great to do that.
Yeah.
And that's when I see the language of Christians so often mirroring the language of culture.
Yeah.
And
The
it's
language of
not
culture.
gracious.
Yeah. The language of culture, especially online, is to lash out, and it feels good immediately in the
Yep.
aftermath. But
Yep.
then you have to babysit your post or the comments, and you've now dragged yourself into this, you know, back and forth. Whereas the language
Yep.
of grace
Yep.
it can be a tough pill to swallow
Yep.
initially,
Yeah.
but like you like I can you know, I can count on one hand, I think, off the top of my head. I'm sure there's more, but like how many times I've actually done this well. And which is why I was a big fan of the Facebook unsubscribe button when it came out years ago. Because like I can still be your friend, but I don't get to see any of your stuff. But like I've never regretted choosing the language of grace, like walking away
Right.
or
Right.
saying, you know what, that's a really interesting perspective. Like,
Yep.
and there's people, like you said, there are people I can list them off for you that I know who are so good at this. And like the way I'm wired, I'm skeptical of them initially. I'm like, what's
Yeah.
your angle here? And
Yeah.
that's not me. Like it's a difficult thing to do. But the times I have chosen the language of grace and have paused and asked, how am I administering grace here? Or have chosen to point people to Jesus instead of pointing people to, you know, something else on earth. I've never regretted that. I
Yeah.
never have. It doesn't taste good in
You
the
know,
short term.
you break up what did you say about the short term?
It it doesn't taste good in the short term, but
It
in the
doesn't
long
taste
term
good
it
in the
does.
short term, which was going to be my point. It feels so much better in the short term. In fact, this is what gets rewarded on social media. The person who can mic drop
Mm-hmm.
somebody else gets
Yep.
the most likes.
That's right.
You know
The
what I mean?
clap
It's
back.
like if you can have the mic drop moment, like that's what gets rewarded on social media, not the gracious response of how somebody, you know, how somebody administered grace to somebody else. I'll tell you, you know, I used this illustration in our last series, but it was actually the political series. See, because you don't hear these stories very often, and it actually had to get pulled up. You didn't hear about this in any media other than you know, on Sports Center. The conversation between Julian
Yeah.
Sean anyway, that it's the back. I think maybe it's Deshaun Jackson. But, you know, one guy said something about Edelman, and it could have been perceived as anti-Semitic, and Julian Edelman's Jewish, and so some reporter asked him about it. You know, almost looking for a like him to, you know, do the slap back. You know,
Right.
and and um, and Julian Edelman, I'll never forget his response. He's like, you know, I just think there's an opportunity here. Like I kind of want to offer to Deshaun Jackson, if he'd like to, I'd love to take him to the Holocaust Museum and just help him understand, you know, the heritage of
Mm-hmm.
the Jewish people and what we've dealt with and things like that. And then I'd love to walk down the street with him to the the Civil Rights Museum,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd love to learn more about his heritage and what people of color have had to deal with. And I just thought, like, you're not going to hear that on any of the news outlets. That's not going to go. It's not going to be in the New York Times. It's not going to be in any of these major culture shaping news publications. But like, here's this like really quick story on Sports Center that captures this. And unfortunately, it wasn't super celebrated and rewarded.
Right.
But that is the type of response that de-escalates. It actually allows people to have real conversations. And look, I'm the biggest Patriots hater of them all, but like I became a fan. I was like, I like this guy. Like this guy, Julian Edelman, is like, I mean, he's at the very least, he's a humble and really good dude. Like just for that to be his response. So
I can tell you too, like, we live in again, this feels like a whole separate podcast episode, but we live in such a meme culture where it's like, if I can just condense this message into a meme that like ignores, that really kind of takes out huge chunks of another side's perspective and facts and leaves those to the side. But I'm just going to put this statement in a meme and then boom, hit send. And then that gets shared. Like, again, like that's what you're talking about. That's the mic drop. It's not a dialogue. It's a monologue, and the language of grace is a dialogue. At the very least, it's part of visiting other people's position that we talked about. It's got a lot of that. But I do believe like we're all hardwired for it. We're all we're hardwired to recognize it and to speak it because God has spoken it over us, and so it's not impossible. It just goes against our flesh.
Well, when you say hardwired, we all have a hardwiring that has strengths and weaknesses. Each of the colors has their strengths and weaknesses. I mean, look, the strengths of the enthusiasm and the fun and the people side of the yellow personality has its positives, but it has its negatives too. The red, I mean, it has its ability to galvanize and rally people together. It also has the ability to be incredibly divisive and torch people to the ground. And so like, I think the hardwiring in us is dependent, whether it's experienced by people as building up or tearing down, is dependent on what's controlling that. And that's the whole idea of controlling the tongue, not letting unwholesome things come out of our mouth. And as we're going to talk about this week a little bit, it depends on who's governing you on the inside. Like what's controlling you on the inside is what actually determines what wants to come out of your mind and your head and your heart. And once you have things that are bearing good fruit coming out of you, it makes it easier because you don't have to always be governing your words. Like I was saying to you earlier, like this person that I was following online, I'm sure some of those issues and why I wanted to just, throw out comments that are not helpful or healthful had something to do with how that hits me. I'm sure it has something to do with what's going on inside of me. And when you pay attention to those things and you deal with them, it's a little easier to govern your words because you don't have to worry about unhealthful words coming out of your mouth. Now it's just a matter of, I need to learn you. So that's what we've been talking about is unhelpful is I just need to pay attention to your needs. This next week, just as a preview, as we're wrapping up here, the preview of this next week is, sometimes we have unhelpful words and sometimes there's unhealthful words. Sometimes they're unhelpful and unhelpful. And that's when we can do some real damage, long-term damage to individuals and to relationships. And so we're going to talk about this Sunday. We're going to talk about how to be careful in that way. And
that's awesome.
And sidestep it. So yeah.
Well, we're looking forward to that. That's a good teaser for next week. Well, I think we'll end it there. Once again, if you haven't taken the I said this, you heard that temperament assessment, You can do that online at missionaz.org. We have it at the banner. If you're watching on YouTube, it'll be in the comments below. Really encourage you to take that, like we said, take it with your family, have discussions about this stuff, and in all things, let's ask ourselves that question: How are we ministering grace? How are we speaking the language of grace? So thank you for tuning in. We will look forward to seeing you back here next week and online or in person at Mission this Sunday. Have a great rest of your week.